What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be covering the brand new perk that's coming to Black Ops 6, and this is Slipstream. At the time of recording this, I don't know exactly when this perk is going live, but we have access to it in custom games, and we have for a while now, so I wanted to get this video up a little bit in advance so you guys can prepare and fully understand this perk before diving in once it's available. Now with this perk, it is a tier 3 red perk, so it contributes to the Enforcer specialty, and it competes directly with the Double Time perk as well in that tier. And the description for it just states, it raises your base sprint speed at the cost of removing tactical sprint. And that may sound familiar for anybody that played Modern Warfare 3 last year. This is the same idea as the all-terrain boots in that game. And you might be wondering right up front, why would you want to sacrifice tactical sprint? And the primary reason behind this is sprint out times. Now, I'm sure most of you that watch my channel are aware of the fact that we have our standard sprint out time, which is how long it takes to fire your gun when coming out of a regular sprint. And then we have our tactical sprint out time, which is always going to be a slower value, and it does depend on the weapon and the weapon class, but usually that sprint out time for tactical sprint is about 1.3 to 1.7 times slower than your standard sprint out time. Or maybe a little easier to keep track of, it's going to take you roughly 80 to 120 milliseconds longer to get your gun up coming out of a tactical sprint compared to a standard sprint. And that amount of time can absolutely be the difference between winning or losing a gunfight. Now, of course, the trade-off to this is we don't get tactical sprint, which is the fastest way to move in this game. So let's have a look at the movement speed comparisons to see how the different movement types stack up against Slipstream. And the first comparison here is going to be our base sprint with no tactical sprint involved compared to Slipstream, just to see how much of a boost to our standard sprint we get with this perk. And as you can see, we cover that 80 meters very noticeably faster with the Slipstream perk. As expected, of course, that's literally what this perk is designed to do. And based on my test here, it appears we move about 11% faster with Slipstream compared to our standard sprint speed. And that's a pretty big boost when we're talking about movement speeds. Now, of course, in a realistic situation, if you're covering long distances like this, you're not just going to be using a standard sprint if you're not using Slipstream. You're definitely going to be tactical sprinting in there as well. So this next test is tactical sprinting as much as I can across this distance, which is, again, 80 meters. And this is without the double time perk. We will look at double time after this one. So that means we do actually run out of tactical sprint here, and I have to wait for it to recharge. And as you can see, covering that 80 meter distance is pretty comparable between the two, although tactical sprint did win by a little bit. So you're going to be very slightly slower at covering longer distances while using Slipstream, but not by a large margin. It's going to be pretty comparable. In saying that though, if we use double time in the tier 3 slot instead of Slipstream, and we do that same test, now our tactical sprint duration is doubled, and in this case, we're covering 80 meters quite noticeably faster than we can with Slipstream. So if all you're looking for with your class setup is covering long distances from point A to point B as fast as possible, then double time is absolutely your better option over Slipstream. And the same thing can be said about short distances as well. If you're just sprinting in very short distances where even without double time, you're not going to be running out of tactical sprint, in those cases, of course, tactical sprint is still faster than the Slipstream perk. So definitely a couple things to consider here, and there is a clear trade-off to using this perk and losing out on tactical sprint. However, just another comparison here, I want to see what this looks like in third person. If you're just running across a gap, what does that look like when we're looking at base sprint versus Slipstream versus tactical sprint? And the best way to look at it here is actually to overlay these. And we can see, as expected, Slipstream is basically right in the middle between tactical sprint and regular sprint. And then one final aspect of movement speed I wanted to take a look at for this video, because I think it's going to surprise a lot of you, is sliding. Since you're not able to tactical sprint, is this also going to affect your ability to slide? And as we know, sliding is very, very important in this game. So it sounds like it could be a big sacrifice losing out on tactical sprint, because presumably that's going to be helping us with our slides. However, something I discovered while making this video is your slide speed doesn't appear to be affected much, if at all, by tactical sprint. As you can see, when we overlay these, they're pretty much the same. There may be a slight discrepancy you see there. That's likely just due to the fact that I didn't enter the slide at the exact same point every time, since I can't control that perfectly with testing. But I was quite surprised to see this. It doesn't really appear to matter if you tactical sprint into a slide versus regular sprinting into a slide or Slipstream sprinting into a slide. That slide speed appears to be independent, and therefore this is an area where you're not actually losing out by using Slipstream over tactical sprint. And so with all of this in mind, is Slipstream worth using? I would say it just depends on your setup, your playstyle, and also just your personal preferences. When it comes to your setup, if you're using guns that have quite a fast sprint out time and even a fast tactical sprint out time, like SMGs for instance, then it's not quite as punishing to have to deal with a tactical sprint out time compared to your regular sprint out time, and therefore you might want to stay away from Slipstream. On the flip side of that, if you have a gun that has a very slow tactical sprint out time, especially relative to the standard sprint out time, like an LMG or even some of the assault rifles, then Slipstream may be a solid option for you if you're okay sacrificing those bursts of speed that you get with tactical sprint. As for myself, I definitely plan on using Slipstream a fair amount from here on out, not necessarily on every single setup. And I know I've said this in the past, I said this with the all-terrain boots, but I want to bring this up here again. After seeing this perk in the game, I can't help but think what Call of Duty would be like if we just didn't have tactical sprint at all. In my opinion, Call of Duty would be better off without having to deal with tactical sprint. Of course, to compensate for that, I would also want to see something like Slipstream built in, so we get a faster base sprint than what we currently have, kind of like what we see with Slipstream. But I think this could be beneficial for several reasons. First off, this would make for more consistent and predictable routes and timings on the map if everybody just has one sprint speed, like we had in the past before Modern Warfare 2019. For Black Ops 6 especially, I think this would also help a bit with the map pacing. It would slow things down by a very small margin, not by a lot. You'd still be able to get across the maps pretty quickly by having Slipstream essentially built in. It would also potentially help tone down some of those camera braking situations or peeker's advantage situations to a degree, although apparently not with sliding at all. And then finally, especially when we've got Omni movement mixed into the equation, I think having tactical sprint can make things just a little too complex for newer or lesser skilled players. There's a lot going on there with the movement options, and I think Omni movement itself is complex enough with a single sprint value, and we don't need to be stacking tactical sprint on top of that. There's also the argument that tactical sprint is very hard on controllers, although in Black Ops 6, they at least brought some really nice accessibility features there, so we have a lot more control over that, and you don't have to be as hard on your controller if you get your settings right. But then finally, the last point that I have here, and kind of my main point against tactical sprint, is I don't think it adds a layer of tactical gameplay like it was intended to. I think the initial intention of tactical sprint, and the reason it's even called tactical sprint, is in a situation you're supposed to decide what's best for this situation, a regular sprint or a tactical sprint. You have to weigh the pros and cons, and sometimes you should be sprinting, other times you should be tactical sprinting, but in reality, who actually does that? Basically nobody, especially when you get to the higher levels of play. Everybody always just wants to tactical sprint because it's the fastest way to get around the map, and that's what Call of Duty players look for. And then they learn techniques like slide canceling, for instance, to mitigate the downsides that come with tactical sprint, which no longer makes it a tactical decision, it just makes it the default way to move around the map all the time. And since in practice, it doesn't really get used the way that you would think that it would be intended to be used, then the question is, why do we need it? What does it actually add to the gameplay experience? In my eyes, basically nothing positive. And I think this is one of those times where simple is just better. And with how tactical sprint is actually used in practice in Call of Duty, it just seems like complexity for complexity's sake, and it's not something that actually adds anything meaningful to the gameplay experience overall. So I am curious to see if tactical sprint will stick around in Call of Duty long term. It's not like I actually expect them to remove it for Black Ops 6. I think it's too late for Black Ops 6, especially since many elements of the game, like double time, for instance, are tied to tactical sprint, and now we have Slipstream as well. So I don't expect it to change for this game, but perhaps going forward with Call of Duty. Maybe not next year, maybe not the year after that. But long term, I'm curious to see if tactical sprint sticks around or if they end up cutting it out. Now, of course, these are all just my opinions, and I'd love to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, how are you feeling about the addition of the Slipstream perk in Black Ops 6, and do you see yourself using it at all? And second, how would you feel about them removing tactical sprint from Call of Duty in the future while also improving standard sprint speeds to compensate for that, so you can still get from point A to point B on longer distances in roughly the same amount of time? Do you guys think that would be a good route to go with the game, or not so much? If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.